Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this latest webinar, which we are organizing as a Europe Direct core platform. For those of you who have not followed any of our previous webinars this year, we are producing a number of webinars aimed at informing the business community on the various aspects of the European Green Deal, and alongside that as well, the transition towards a digital economy. Today, we are discussing the European Farm-to-Fork strategy, which is in fact a cornerstone of the European Green Deal. And to discuss this topic, we have two very interesting guests, whom I welcome and thank for the presence here today. So we have with us Emanuela Degiorgio, who is the founder of the Veg Box, and also Rafael Sammut, who is a chef. So also, I presume, very much interested in this topic. Maybe I can ask you both to briefly introduce yourselves and also the work that you do. Maybe you'd like to start, Manuela.
Yes, thank you, Roberta, for inviting us on this. I think it's a very interesting topic. So my name is Manuela, and I'm the founder of the Veg Box Malta, which is basically a place where we want to reconnect the local communities with local farmers in order to revalue the work of rural lands, basically, and continue supporting farmers who grow our food, basically.
Very interesting.
Yes, thank you.
And also challenging, because farming is an area which has become quite challenging and not so attractive to many young farmers, unfortunately.
Yes, unfortunately, that is an issue. But if we try and create a little bit more value around that sector, I think people will go into it, because there's a lot of beauty in working with agriculture, and I think people just need to rediscover it.
Good. So more about that later. Rafael, yes. A little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Rafael Sammut. I'm a chef at Briu. For about 5 years ago, I opened my first restaurant, and back then it was people consumed a lot of local pork, basically. So from day one, I started working with local farmers very closely. I've never ever bought a piece of imported or whatever pork that comes from. So from day one, we're very sort of locally fixated, if you may, and I realized right away sort of how deep, sort of to a certain extent, the problem, if you may, of how people get so much of their produce from abroad is in Malta. The awareness of local produce is very low. To add to what Emanuela said, I think people also, apart from just rediscovering farming as a job and as a career, I think that the customers need to rediscover the local produce. Essentially, it's not appreciated enough. When you look at what they offer and what we get offered at even the farmers market twice a week, sorry, I went to Maltese, and then you go to certain supermarkets and everything just looks the same. So it has to be rediscovered from both ends, more than just from the professional point of view. I think even from a consumer point of view.
Yes, yeah. And there is a lot of what you're saying, which is in fact incorporated in the farm-to-fork strategy of the European Union. In fact, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to just give a very brief overview of what this strategy actually entails. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, the European Union considers that a healthy and more sustainable food system, in fact, is a cornerstone of the European Green Deal. We've heard a lot about the European Green Deal, and we'll be hearing more in the weeks and months to come. And in fact, the aims of the strategy seek to ensure, first of all, that Europeans have access to healthy, affordable, and sustainable food. The farm-to-fork strategy is also being considered as a means to tackle the climate change problem, which we need to address and address urgently. Also, through this strategy, the European Union seeks to actually protect the environment and protect biodiversity, whilst also ensuring a fair economic return in the supply chain, primarily obviously for farmers, and also a substantial increase in organic farming practices. In fact, I'd like to share a quote by the Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Frans Timmermans, who had this to say. He said, "The coronavirus crisis has shown how vulnerable we all are and how important it is to restore the balance between human activity and nature. At the heart of the Green Deal, the biodiversity and farm-to-fork strategies point to a new and better balance of nature, food systems, and biodiversity, to protect our people's health and well-being, and at the same time to increase the EU's competitiveness and resilience. These strategies are a crucial part of the great transition we are embarking upon." The 2030 targets, which the European has set for itself as a but then obviously, of course, for us as well as a country, as a European Union member state, is to reduce the use and risk of chemical and hazardous pesticides by 50%, and to reduce fertilizer use by at least 20%, and that's by the year 2030, which is pretty soon. So in terms of next steps, we're looking at creating a food environment that makes the healthy and sustainable choice the easy choice. Sounds like it should be the obvious, but as also Rafael mentioned in his introduction, it's not necessarily always the easier choice and the obvious choice. And that's because thousands of deaths are in fact attributed to unhealthy diets across the EU. We're looking at adding food labels, which allow consumers to choose healthy and sustainable diets. We're also looking as a European Union to step up the fight against food waste. Also investing more in research and innovation in this area, and also promoting the global transition, essentially making European food famous for its sustainability, and through that having a competitive advantage as a union in relation to other continents. In terms of benefits for farmers, the strategy is aiming at ensuring that farmers would have higher returns for their work and their produce, and that they also play a stronger role in the food supply chain, also allowing them to have access to new business opportunities, whilst also lowering their own operational costs and also the cost of the product in the end to the consumer, also then creating a stronger connection to the consumer and also having access to new global markets. So that's the EU Farm to Fork strategy, just very briefly and in a nutshell. And now on to you. I mean, when you hear about these aims and these targets, what would you say are the main challenges in implementing these, in achieving these aims?
One of the most important things, and I've been saying this for a while, is the education behind it. You have to start them young, so even at school. I mean, sometimes I look at the home economics curriculum and it's a joke. You know, it just doesn't add up. I mean, they're learning things that are not too important, so they probably won't hold on to them, because the things that are not important in life you tend to forget the best, in my opinion. And they're completely outdated, you know. If you can teach people from a younger age to appreciate, to identify what is the right from wrong, anything obviously in life, you know, and it goes down to the most basic things like vegetables, like meat, whatever. If you can start them off there and you give them a solid foundation, then these people, when they're sent off into their life to buy food for their household, or when they're buying food for their restaurant, then they know how to pinpoint, you know, and they know how to appreciate. So they will go to the right places. They won't be trapped. I mean, I honestly, I have not walked into a supermarket to buy vegetables since I went to the farmer's market the first time 4 years ago. Honestly, no, I have never turned back. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense. You get better prices, you get better produce, it lasts longer in your fridge, it tastes better. You know, you have accessibility to go twice a week, which is more than enough. It's going to stay fresh. It's going to stay, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, Manuela.
No, you.
So I don't know, maybe because I have a certain passion for food too, it helps. I'm sure that helps. But it's, you know, you're getting more of these farmers, these producers like Manuela that are scattered around the island. You know, you have in Jar, you have Manuela who's you're in the valley of
Manicata.
Ecco, għandkom taqali twice a week, a number of, you know, so you get them all around the island. There are a few in the south. So I really don't think there's an excuse. I think there's lack of education. There's a real lack of awareness. So sometimes I feel that more than actually investing in research and development, because as such, you know, you don't need to reinvent a wheel of something that is so simple and is already there. You know, I mean, piuttosto, I think reinventing the wheel over the past 50 years has moved us away from the right sort of production. And so I think we really need to take a step back and more than reinvesting in research and development as such, you need to more reinvest in education and awareness. I think that's where the most important, you know, and the same for climate change, really. I mean, that's where we have to start. People who have been living with bad habits now for 40, 50 years, it's going to be very difficult to change their habits, including farmers. I work with pig farmers who, you know, how impossible to change. I tried introducing new feeding systems, new diets, using fresh whey to reduce even the cost on the farm, and trying to use a byproduct, you know, to reduce our carbon footprint. So I've tried implementing some really nice programs which no one uses in Malta, but unfortunately, we have farmers who are now at an average age of 60 plus, and they've been working like this for the past 50 years, and it was taught to them by their grandparents, etc. They're going to be a bit resilient to change. So, as is the farmer, will be the consumer at a certain age. And I really do think it is important for it to be effective in the next 10 years, that the age gap, the age group who we target now has to be the right one. You know?
Can I be devil's advocate a little bit? You mentioned going to the farmers market, and that sounds great, but the reality is that many of us live very fast lives, and especially
I live a very, very fast life too, Roberta.
No, but it's different.
I'm just thinking the regular person who needs to, you know, find time to go to work and run a household, maybe look after the children, and then also do the shopping. And many of us do our shopping online, for example.
I understand. Ara, you have, I don't know, I mean, you know, dejjem irraġunajt illi no matter how tight you are on time, if you plan ahead, you manage. Farmers market is open probably 5:30 in the morning, so you get. That's the beauty of it. I find a lot of people buying produce on the way to work. So you see they're already changed for work. You can tell. They come and they keep going to work or after work. You know, plus Saturday morning, most people are free anyway. So there is a way around it. I think it's more the will behind it and the appreciation. The will is going to come through appreciation. You know, meta tmur on the restaurant, and I realized I was saving 40% on my vegetables at the end of veg at the end of the month. So you have a good saving, and the produce just baħar jaqsam. I mean, you can't even compare.
That's a huge saving, 40%.
It is a huge saving, literally huge saving. I mean, it's ridiculous, and for a household, it could easily be the same. You know what I mean? Easily. I mean, on this do. So maybe these aren't as niche as other farmers, you know, but there is a saving, definitely.
Manuela,
I mean, pardon. Yes. So I totally understand what Rafael says. Of course, the thing is, from the other side, when it comes to the consumer, the real reality is that everyone is running around like a headless chicken. Most of us, we're running after. Everyone is very fast-paced in their own lives, you know. So unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that their food is the most important thing, because we can get food very easily without thinking of its quality, you know. And most people, unfortunately, are still in a situation where they go to the supermarket. So one thing is trying to get the people to have more time for their food, which means they would take time on a Saturday morning rather than running around with their kids to take them to extracurricular activities or having to do the laundry or they will take the time to go to the farmer's market because they understand that it is better quality food, get it at a better price, you're supporting a farmer, you're getting your carrot from Malta. You know, I think first they need to understand these things. Then secondly, unfortunately, when people go to the supermarket, Maltese produce is not valorized. It's not given a space in each supermarket. There's no law which says, look, every supermarket has to show everything that is from Malta with a label properly and stuff. Most people don't look at the label. They just see a carrot and they buy it. If they see Holland underneath, they just, you know, go past it because it's not really the Maltese produce is not put up front, you know, and shown, which I think needs to be done because unfortunately the quotas and all these rules and regulations from the European Union about import-export has created a situation where it's obvious that if you're a business who is for profit, you're going to think, I'm going to get carrots from Holland because they cost me 50 cents a kilo. They look nicer and people will buy them. The Maltese summer carrot is a horrible carrot, but they are so tasty. So we have to see it from both sides.
Horrible
so from one
carrot,
side,
say horrible the way it looks, correct?
it looks, yes. I will show you some photos if you wish. They look hairy, you know, because the plant needs more water. In the summer, it looks, anyway, so the reality is that they don't grow them anymore in summer, the carrots, so much because they're not then bought at the market or at the Pitcalia. It's at a farmer's market, Rafael would find, because those farmers will make an effort to grow them. But if it's someone who's going to take it to the main market and it's just going to vanish into the sea of supermarkets, he's not going to bother because they probably won't buy at the supermarkets or the hawkers. So it's about educating the consumer to become more aware, even at the supermarket, because they can buy local at the supermarket. And if they start asking about it, then the supermarket is going to start thinking, oh, maybe we should buy local. And then from that, they say, oh, that carrot actually is true, it's cheaper, but it's not so tasty, for example, and the people want. So it's a chain reaction, really. And it's about educating, like Rafael said, but also the European Union and the governments and the entities which are importing or selling this imported produce need to try and see, okay, it is good for me because my supermarket's making money, but really and truly, the people who are growing carrots, it's just an example, right? We need to support them and buy their carrots because Maltese carrots are not exported. If the Maltese don't buy the produce of the Maltese farmers, no one buys it, apart from the potatoes that are exported. So it's from both sides that, yes, a proper understanding of how important it is for yourself, health-wise and money-wise. For the farmer, it encourages and continues someone who's going to take care of the land and create beautiful Maltese food, vegetables for then healthy meals. And the entities that need to see that they need to also have a positive impact on who they're serving, really, and who they're buying from. So it's a whole ecosystem that needs to change.
Definitely. To add to what Manuela said, because it was a very, very important point. If you go to, for example, Italy, where I lived for about 4 or 5 years, you realize, and obviously I was there food-based, so I was in the kitchen, I was at suppliers, at farmers. Over the years, they've protected their recipes, their produce with DOPs, denominations, IGPs, so they've given them value, and that's what Manuela was talking about. In Malta, we have none of this. So people, they can't tell, you know, the real good quality or the real da jiġi mill-pwales, jew da jiġi minn hemm, għalfejn jiġi minn hemm, għax għandu ċertu rieħ u temperatura jinżel bil-lejl. There are factors behind it that make produce better than others, you know, climate, microclimates, etc. I mean, jien ma nifhimx ta' barra minn hawn, jien li għajdu li what the farmers tell me, etc. So, but there are these things that can't make sense, but we never valued them. That's the problem. We never valued them. I mean, I think we don't even have a denomination. We had the chance and we lost it a few months ago. I don't know if you remember that. we have denominations on nothing. You know, we have good.
Why is that? Is it a lack of pride in what?
No, we lost it on the Xbejna.
Lack of focus.
No, and the big boys won the fight basically, because what happened was Benna's lawyers came in, il-Xbejna, il-propju Xbejna hija riċetta bil-ħalib tagħna. I can't speak in Maltese, le moraw, is it okay?
Yeah, I'm sure our audience is bilingual.
All right.
So yes, we just.
All right, so il-riċetta hija bil-ħalib tan-naġa. So issa, if this went through, then the Xbejna
Of Benna.
which has Xbejna on the packet would no longer be allowed to be written Xbejna.
Okay.
Because it's cow.
Because it's cow milk. And the recipes, you know, so like Parmigiano Reggiano, it has to be from the cows within a certain region, produced in a certain way, aged for a certain amount of time. The same like the Barolo, the same like certain olive oils, the same like certain onions. They have DOPs for a reason. In Malta, we have none of this. Why? Because we never had, maybe we don't have the food culture they had, but at the same time, we never valued it. We got stuck in this consumerism and globalization. So
Exactly.
there was no respect for what the farmers were doing, where the produce came from. Again, you know, 50 cents per kilo from abroad was cheaper. Meshi. That was the mentality, and now it's brought us to where we are today.
I think we were in a vicious cycle before. Now we need to turn it a little bit towards a virtuous cycle where we create a link between the community and the food producers to get the community to want the food producers to always do a better job, and they give them the value, and then they're going to just keep wanting to do it. But we need people to fight for the Xbejna. No one probably even knew about this happening, for example, because people in Malta, like around the world, are not focused on these things. We're so distracted. We are asked to be distracted so that these things pass without us even noticing, in a way, you know, because life is so fast paced that I wonder how many people knew about this thing, about the Xbejna, you know. So it's about getting the information out there.
That too, it's about publicity. Unfortunately, publicity and propaganda is bucketed where necessary. Eh? I mean, the Xbejna, why didn't it get enough awareness? Because it didn't have the right people backing it. You know, the farmers that I know, they produce a proper Xbejna, are the ones who walk around barefooted with torn shorts all day. So these don't have the means. They might have the money, but they don't have the means, they don't have the education. Asking me for DOP, they had no one, you know, with a bit of a structure, education backing them. They're lost in this modern world, you know, these people. It's incredible. Their marketing and things like that. It's you realize how cut off they are from 2021 sort of.
But that is why the structure needs to help them by creating, for example, green jobs for people who have the education and the knowledge to be able to help them. But they need to be able to help them if they're earning something. Now, obviously, people can't expect to earn millions, so also possibly expectations of what life is all about. People need to just relax a little bit, and rather than seeing all the bling. But they could be green jobs for educated people who have passion to help the farmers, the people who work within the sector, to help them. But no one wants to do it because there isn't the money behind it, unfortunately. So we need to find ways to get these people who can help on board. Because if that happens, like we see it at the Veg Box, a lot of the farmers who we work with, they don't even have time to do their own marketing. In fact, last year there was a problem at the Pitcalia, and a lot of farmers had to start selling their own produce. They literally went back onto the streets and started selling, taking photos and getting their children to post on Facebook. And so we need to help them to get the word out rather than, you know.
So this is what you're saying is that this is where the investment of any of the EU programs and facilities should be directed toward.
For example, yes.
When it comes to the restaurant industry, do you see that they have a role to play in helping this transition?
Definitely. To be honest, one of the most shocking things when I over the years of going to the farmers market now is the lack of chefs you see there, man. It's ridiculous. You see a few, I recognize a few, but not that many at all. You know? I do feel that lately there's been a bit more of a change towards local produce. There has been a bit more of this like movement, but it still needs to gain a lot of momentum. And I do feel, yes, we play an important role, because if you go to a restaurant and they, they explain the food properly and you taste something that is local and you say, "Lala, how good," because technically a restaurant should produce and serve, should treat that ingredient better and get the best out of an ingredient. I mean, it's our job, we're full-time on it, so we should manage to do that better than a household. We're showcasing what Malta can give you. So if it's done correctly, dawn nis ħajdu that Malta, like I do it sometimes. I get very good local beef, ridiculously good. Like I say, I'm a big meat fan, sort of. I love meat. I love everything, to be fair. But and because I love meat so much, illum il-ġurnata I'm eating a lot less of it, but I always look for better quality and where it's sourced, because my mentality has changed too. So even at the restaurant, for example, beef, we only get to sell it once a month, maybe, because we know that the local supply is very low for good quality. It has to be selected, it has to be treated properly. We do a lot of the work that they don't do at the butcheria, so it costs us a lot more money. Pero when you hit the nail on the head, it's really good, and people don't believe it's local beef. That's it. Ma jistax ikun. Kieku ġieli ma norihomx l-istampa tal-biċċerija, għax jemmuni.
Oh, wow.
So there's this mentality, if it's local, sometimes it can't be of such good quality, or it shouldn't be worth so much. It's the mentality sometimes, Madonna wasalna fek.
I think you made some interesting points, which show, I don't know if you do this consciously or not. First of all, I think you're doing something which is sustainable, because you said that you would only sell the meat occasionally, not on a regular basis, because it needs to be a certain kind of meat, which is a practice which could be also practiced within a household as well, no?
I mean, I think the world is pointing. If you look at the climate change you mentioned earlier, the world is pointing at a radical change to our diet. We cannot keep on eating this amount of protein, iktar u iktar, if it's coming from South America. It's crazy. The carbon footprint behind it is ridiculous. It's not sustainable.
It's not only that, but the people don't know that the beef in South America is fed very bad grains, which are often GMO. And then they do get into our food system. People are unaware of what the animal is eating, because I don't think they're eating,
No, in fact, the latest trend about 5 years ago, as far
is grass-fed.
No, has moved from back to grain-fed. And that's where
yes.
And they do that for a reason. Why? Because business-wise, it pays them.
Of course.
But so now grain-fed beef is considered better quality and more expensive, if you have to look.
Okay.
Mela. There's been a change the past 4 years. We had about 10 years ago, started moving towards grass-fed, and there was a good 6 to 8 year grass-fed movement. And what's moved back the past 4 years has moved back to grain-fed.
But how can it be, knowing that the grains come from grains which are genetically modified en masse in Argentina, for example?
Because one, people don't know that, and two, they push that in the grain is designed to give the animal the perfect diet, whereas grass, your animal can be malnourished, you can calculate how much, etc., which scientifically makes sense, but how much actually or manafsh,
yes,
essentially manafsh.
Lots
people are just unaware.
And also practices which I believe would have an impact not only on the environment, but also on our health, no?
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes. For example, one thing which I find very strange in Malta is that Malta used to have the most windmills per capita in the world. We had something like 48 windmills, as in Holland has loads of windmills, but per capita, Malta had the most. Then slowly they were destroyed, but now there are no real working windmills to basically turn the grain. So all the grain we grow in Malta is basically just for the animals. And 50 years ago, Maltese lived on bread diets, but the bread was good quality bread and no one was obese. So there's something wrong also with the fact that we're getting grain from abroad, grown who knows where, in what condition, on what land, and we're just importing it and making Maltese bread. But the reality is the grain is not Maltese, and we grow so much of it. Why don't we try and restore that sort of culture? Bread is such an important part of Maltese diet, and if it's good bread, it shouldn't be bad for us, and we shouldn't be intolerant to it or, put on so much weight if we eat bread. It doesn't really make sense. I mean, they used to eat bread in the times of Jesus, basically. They weren't fat. It's true.
Can I ask a question in relation to that? Because the pandemic has also shown us that we are very vulnerable to issues of food security. Basically, we rely on imported food, imported ingredients to be able to supply enough food for the country. Which is dangerous, obviously, because if something had to happen and the importations had to slow down or stop in their entirely, essentially we wouldn't have enough food to feed the people that we have here. How feasible is it to shift that trend? Do we have the space, the capacity to grow more food and to produce more food locally for our population?
I think it's totally possible. I might be completely off the spectrum here when it comes to imagination of what is possible, but I really believe that Malta could be a showcase for localizing to the best, really focusing on saying, okay, in this area, these things can grow and they can grow very well. Let's valorize that land, find people to work it and help them grow that food for us. And in the south, for example, we can grow these things and these are the beef. Like there's definitely a way to maximize on what we have, because a lot of land is not used, and it's not that the land can't be used, it's just that the infrastructure for it, so there isn't a farmer to work it. Maybe he doesn't have the help he needs, or he might need some machinery to get water to the land, because since it's not raining so much, we can't grow onions. Onions is an example. A few months ago there was onions from New Zealand, that little, and people were like, this doesn't make real sense, we have so many onions. But the thing is that if it doesn't rain and the fields are fields with no water, in the past people could grow onions, potatoes and wheat, for example, because the rain was enough through the winter season. That is unfortunately changing. So people who had land where they could grow just onions without the need of external water now have to get bowsers in. There might not be a road to that field, so the infrastructure needs to change. But I think it could be possible, but we really need to all make an effort. Yes, work on it. Everyone literally start talking like, where we're going to do this, how we're going to do this. We need a Wilmin to be working. We need to find the grain that we can grow from the base, and then upwards. But a lot of food is wasted, Roberta. A lot of food that is grown in Malta, if you go to the Pitcalia, is container full of cabbage, cauliflower. When there is too much of it, it is just given to the animals, which at least it's not being totally wasted, but it's not going into the food chain for the people. So we need to make sure that we also educate farmers and show them that growing 3,000 broccoli in one season makes no sense. Grow 200 so that you sell all 200 at a better price. Maybe try and sell them to those around you. So get your family to help you find your network. So we try and localize. I think localization to the minimum, the north, the center, the south, cities need to have places where urbanites have access to the rural food, So like imagine a farmer's market in Slima, Saturday morning. People are not going to go to Ta'ali. It will take them an hour and a half to get out of Slima or Valletta or Birkirkara. So if, for example, we have the old markets like in the past, I think that would help, definitely.
I agree with you 100%. Whether Malta can sustain itself at our current population and over the summer where our population almost doubles with tourism, is very difficult to say. I would think that someone with the right statistics would need to work that out, and I'm sure it can be worked out because they know how much land is there for agricultural use, how much can be produced, etc. We will be slightly limited in offering, maybe, but at least, like Manuela said, first maximize what we can do locally, and then what's left import, you know, and what you import would be of a certain quality, għax ma tistax issibu Malta, etc., etc. Another very important thing she pointed out, which over the past 5 years at least has, ma nistax nifhem how we got it so wrong. We dug up half the country, literally half the country, and we didn't put in proper drains to store the water. Water that can be given to the farmers for free, Hasra. It would be enough to probably get them through the summer if we had a proper plan. And they don't even put a gutter. It is, I can't understand when water is becoming the most scarce resource on earth, and they're saying, I mean, you had someone like Bill Gates a few months ago talk, and he said that probably the next world war will be around water, over water, literally. He is actually predicting that. So it's that much of a problem as much as climate change. We dug up the whole country and we did not manage to store and to reduce the runoff. It's, I can't, you know, everything is being done so short-sightedly, bir-rispett kollu ta' ġifieri, qed jagħmlu l-affarijiet biex jagħmluhom, mhux qed jagħmluhom bis-sens.
But the issue then is the education of the people, unfortunately.
Oh,
because
yes, pero Manuela, bir-rispett kollu, all right, if you're in a position or ta' ċertu edukazzjoni, suppost għandek l-edukazzjoni, if you're in charge of
course,
all our infrastructure, supposed you're educated enough and informed enough, and if you are not, then the people behind you who are meant to be, you know, guiding you, because daw team ta' nies, you know, ġo ministeru, m'hemmx bniedem wieħed, hemm team ta' nies bir-rispett kollu. Ħadd ma ġib l-idea. If you speak to the farmers, the biggest problem has been drought and how expensive water is.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Din nismagħhom daw il-problemi kull ġimgħa meta nitkellem mal-bdiewa, and then you do up the road, whatever. They should have storage, water storage in every part of the island, and you should be collecting water, must go back to the sea.
But we need to go on the street, Rafael. The people need to go out on the street and demand that the government, whichever it is there for us. So if people understand...
That won't work nowadays, because there's so little people who... That has to come from...
Because we're distracted, because people are distracted. They're not...
Yeah, but that's something that should come from the European Union or directly, you know?
The context of all of this. Would you say that these shortcomings can also create maybe some opportunities for people who maybe are enterprising, who see a gap somewhere, a possibility, a problem that needs to be solved, and that could be their idea for the next venture? Do you think that's a possibility?
Possibly, but I don't think it's something that should be business driven, you know?
It should be government.
It's something that, you know, the government
yes.
has so much money in digging up the roads anyway. With probably 5% more, they would have put the proper drains in place, you know, to store the water. Ma nafx tagħmel erba' reservoirs ta' ċuċli, jiena xi ma nifhimx, tit espert. You know, I'm sure there are still old reservoirs jgħidu ta' mill-Ingliżi li mhux jintużaw. Probably diġà hemm ċertu affarijiet where you can store so much of the rainfall. You know, we have 3 months of heavy rain a year, which is probably that's it, not even heavy rain. At least store what you can. Mhux kollu għarrimi ħasra, ma napprezzawx.
But that's where the education of the younger come, because unfortunately, honestly, how many people do you think now on a Thursday morning like us are thinking about the water problem? Us? I mean, really, we will be like 2% of this island. Everyone else is like busy running around, thinking about spending their vouchers and thinking about that restaurant and getting a new car and checking Instagram and Facebook. How many of us think of these things? We need to get people thinking of them and thinking, hang on a second, the water...
People do think about them and they do complain. What they don't realize is kulħadd jgħid ta' xogħla hekk għax dak jola u dik hemm problema. They don't yet make the link and the connection. They don't realize that something so basic as collecting water would put down the price on probably half the things in Malta. You know what I mean? The connection isn't yet there. That's the problem. Subconsciously, they are grumbling about it probably every day.
Yes, but now we need to get to the step where they start talking about it amongst their friends and connecting together with other people where they can have their voice heard. So the government and other people who are taking care of these things, not only Malta, around the world, actually listen to the people, because after all, it's the people need to give their opinion, but people don't know what they want. The people don't realize they're just living in a very just their own lifetime, really. Not even the ones who have kids.
Sfortunatamente, although I agree with you and it would be the ideal way forward, I don't think that that's going to happen. Not today. And if we get a strong educational sort of structure in place, it might happen in 15 years, but then how late would it be, you know? It has to come from the very top. It's like ma jiġix mill-Gvern Malti, tiġi mill-Europa, you know, there have to be not even directives, laws in place, fejn tajt isma' aħna lil 20 sena oħra mhux ħajkollna. That's the reality. Mela, from today, we have to start saving every litre we can. You know, even within houses, if you look at South Africa, they implemented systems within hotels. South Africa this year had a zero water day. I don't know if you heard of it.
No.
They literally closed off all the mains to the country for a day because they're so scarce. And in one day, they saved enough water for I don't know how many years. It's ridiculous.
Wow.
It was a ridiculous exercise that proved very worthy. At the same time, they introduced recycling systems within restaurants and hotels. So water, before it goes to the drain, is used at 5 different levels. You know what I mean? So first, for example, it will be used, ma nafx, għall-argument
To wash the dishes.
hotels, esatto, whatever, and then it goes to, it's recycled and goes to dishes, and then recycled again and goes to flushings. But they stage it, so they're using the same water, you know, almost 3 or 4 times.
So these are the kind of investments we need to be looking at as well.
Ecco, and they have to be made, isma, they have to be targets that are made sort of by law quasi, you know, tajt isma, now within 3 years, all our restaurants have to have this much of a saving on water consumption. And 80% of the rain has to be stored somewhere. Ma jistax ikun nibqgħu naħallu dak l-ilma kollu. Imagine the government gave that to farmers for free. Ma jiġib xejn lill-gvern, għandek investiment ta' darba ma jħassra lajna nofs Malta, lajna nofs pajjiż, nofs l-investiment kienet isir. You know what I mean? Ma nafx, ma it's.
Yes, a lot that needs improvement. I'm quite conscious of time, so I'm going to move on to the next question. In my presentation, I mentioned the targets relating to using less chemicals and also using less pesticides and fertilizers. How feasible is that? Because the little bit I speak to farmers, I seem to get the sense that they wouldn't be able to survive financially if they didn't resort to these methods, because otherwise they would have too little produce to sell. What's your take on this?
I mean, from my experience in the last years is that most farmers who rely heavily on pesticides and fertilizers have been using the land for, let's say, 30 years, possibly often growing similar produce, the things that sell most at the market. They do crop rotation, but not so much, and big scale crop rotation. So now they would not be able to rely on them unless they would not be able to work without relying on the chemical pesticides and fertilizers. So what needs to change is the whole way it works, you know, where we try and integrate better fertilizers and better pesticides, which are organic, which are not from chemicals, but from natural ingredients, for example, which one can also buy in a bottle without having to make your own fertilizer like they did 60 years ago. So the gap is very small. It's actually post-World War to today that the farming system has changed, because before the war, the only place you'd buy food was at a farm or at a market. So it was very close. The loop was very small. Whilst now, unfortunately, most farmers went on to growing large amount of crops and needed pesticides to keep the pests away, because the land is not so fertile, so the plants get sicker, and a sicker plant could attract more bugs. So it is possible, again, if we localize. If the farmer localizes and say, okay, I have 10 plots of land. Instead of doing 3 broccoli and 3 cabbage, I'm going to do 10 different things. I'm going to create more biodiversity within my land. I'm going to find insects and beneficial microbes in my soil. I'm going to feed them so that they keep my plants healthy. So I rely less on the pesticides. But again, it's a mentality that needs to change. And labor. A farmer 60 years ago had his whole family with him working. There are very few families who work, like I know one in particular, well, 2 really, who are all the family work together in their agricultural business. But the reality is that most farmers are now fathers of lawyers and architects and people who have become educated and don't really want to work in farming, which is understandable because in these last years they were told don't do it because it's hard work. But if we go back to how it was before the war, then it becomes a lifestyle, then it becomes a family business where you can help each other. So even the educated of the family can help with certain things, you know, and integrating them. So pesticides and fertilizers are needed, but maybe not the chemical ones. So moving towards more organic. So maybe research and technology in Malta, for example, we could find someone who really makes fertilizer from seaweed, for example, or pesticides from the dandelions. But people have to go out, collect seaweed, make fertilizer. So you need to find people who want to do those jobs as well. So that's why then the green jobs comes in. And then the money behind it, who's going to pay for it? The farmer can't pay for it, but maybe the government could subsidize that structure, which will provide the farmer with better pesticides, basically. Again, it's a whole cycle, I believe. So I think they can do it just with a lot of help.
I mean, you have a lot more experience on that than I do because it's obviously your bread and butter, but the feedback I get from a lot of farmers is that also it's been sort of, how can I put it, sort of over-exaggerated slightly, the situation, because
yes,
tell me, Isma, these things are very expensive, aħna m'għandniex margins biex, ma jien ma nafx qatt ma mort nixtri l-bexx jew hekk, but they tell me that's extremely expensive. So they don't spray left, right, and center because they can't afford to either, you know what I mean? So I think that a bit of the media took it a bit overboard at some points because these farmers, a lot of them, many of them at least that I know, they are genuine people, you know, jien ma naffordjax imbex, ma naffordjax imbex, you know, jien ġieli jaqbel li nitlef 20% mill-prodott to insects, etc., because it's cheaper to have a wastage of 20% than to spray so many times again, you know, li għajdu li huma.
Yes, it's true.
So ma nafx. But there is a misconception there.
That's
yes, there is.
Reassuring from a consumer's point of view, because it's true, we do have this impression that the food that we buy is highly sprayed. So that's very reassuring.
But it's funny though, because like one would have the chance, like Rafael was saying, to go to the farmer's market and meet people who produce your food. So you have that contact with them. And that could reassure you, because if you speak to the farmer and they speak to you, they're genuine. But then you're okay to go to the supermarket and buy anything that comes from anywhere, you know. So
and you know, the thing that hits me the most is when you go to a supermarket and everything looks the same. It's almost fake, you know. That to me should raise so many questions with consumers. It might jistax ikun, you know, it's supposed something is natural, you know, like imagine everyone on it same, that's what you're saying, humans immortal look the same. You know, 200 red peppers and they're all quasi identical to each other. Aliyah should raise alarms.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? It's not natural, definitely not natural, because naturally things are different.
A lot of food for thought.
A lot of food for thought. A lot.
If you had to think of the measures which can help us in this transition, we've mentioned education a lot, education of the consumers, education of the players in the restaurants industry. Besides education, what do you think are the factors which can, let's say, be injected into creating this sustainable transition?
I mean, the first thing I would think is that, for example, the localities in Malta need to start mapping out all the land that is available for agriculture, which is government land. I think relocation of these parcels is important, because otherwise, if we leave them empty, it's already starting wrongly. So if, for example, the North, Melleha Local Council had to map out all the spaces that are available, and then even within that same community, look for people to work on those lands. I think that's, the Maltese government has a lot of land which is dedicated to agriculture. It needs to be put back into the hands of people who are going to grow food for the Maltese. I think that is like one step which would definitely help. in creating a bit of movement around that, because it would interest people, I'm sure. I think there would be people who would go into agriculture if there was a bit more help from that side. Then when it comes to the pesticides and all the other things, I think it's about getting people interested in creating new innovative fertilizers and pesticides with natural ingredients here in Malta, for example, and supplying the farmers with those, with the help obviously of the government, who might give any support in creating these new technologies sort of to help.
Okay.
So that's the first thing that comes to my mind, to make it more, to make Malta more sustainable, because we have the land. Most people don't even know that the land is available, or it's in the hands of people who are no longer farming, or just dedicated for wheat. So yeah, that's the first thing.
I think something that really needs to be tackled in this country is, and not just in Malta, probably in many countries, pero jien naf x'qed jiġri hawn mhux xi pajjiżi oħra, illi many times the people at the top, themselves, they don't really understand either. We need an element of, we need a panel where you have technocrats quasi, not diplomats in place. You need scientists, you need experts, because they have to understand, they have to lead us, and they have to have a proper 15-20-year plan where decisions can't be taken politically or they have to be taken by technocrats for the good of the land.
All, yes.
And that's it. And that's the only reason a decision should be taken. No any other reason. Because every time, there's a change in government or ministry or this or that, things seem to start to change. Why should they be changing? The goal should be common.
Of course, but it's not, unfortunately.
No, it's not. And I feel that unless we're going to work like that, unless you're going to work with experts, ma jistax ikun li bniedem li jiggradwa jennaf fil-business jew fl-economics jew bħala avukat qed imexxi il-Ministeru tal-Ambjent. Fis-sens napprezza li it's a system that has been in place for many years, but we're at a point now where obviously it's failed, and we need people who are scientifically expertise in scientifically biex imexxu issa. That's the only way forward. That's the only way forward.
But it needs to become a people government then. Like, what I mean is that it needs to be like Switzerland, where even if they're going to put up a lamppost, everyone votes for it, Really and truly, that would be the best way for, and I think I don't know, Switzerland's a big country and they make it work. So in Malta, why should we not be able to make it work? Like Melliha local council, for example, there should be more connection between the local council and the community, so that they inform them, for example, listen, there's this happening, there's that happening, but there isn't. When you call certain places like government entities or local councils, sometimes it's even difficult to speak with them, because the attitude is not that they're there to help the community. We waste their time often. So unfortunately, the whole attitude needs to change for the people who are working in those positions. They need to realize they're there to help us and to create something better altogether, not just for a job. There needs to be a little bit more heart in the work.
Yeah.
So even the minister at the top, if his own wife doesn't go to the local farmers market and he's the Minister of Agriculture, then the point is lost at the word go.
110%.
So that's why. But
a lot of change that needs to happen across many different dimensions. So it's quite an ambitious goal that we have set for ourselves.
But I think it's possible. I think the fact that we're talking about it is already
if we don't set ambitious goals now, they should have been set 15-20 years ago. With all the respect to past governments, etc. If they're not now, then we don't stand a chance. As in, if in 30
yes.
we should question having more children in this country, in this world, more than the country. It's because
yes.
already unsustainable as it is. So unless we're gonna find new ways to keep up with an unsustainable population, then
yes, and
when it comes,
has been driven loud and clear.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it's not always getting to the end users, to the people. But this is, I mean, we are being told that this is the time to act. It's now or never.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your final thoughts before we wrap up? I mean,
And you know, sorry, another sad point is that I wanted to mention, you know, I actually have farmers who I work with, two in particular, who are seriously thinking, and this is where you realize how deep the problem is. And it's not politically or, you know, so it's just the way they feel, how they've lost faith in their job in Malta. They told me at this rate, it pays me to sell my land, even as a recreational land, people are buying it for crazy rates. Buy a piece of land in Sicily, produce in a better climate with more land, possibly free water, all right, and bring the produce to Malta. So you have farmers now who are my age, they're 30, their parents are 70 plus and they're getting tired and they're phasing out. Although at jindu now, illi għaw Malta kif edin m'għandniex futur. Pero they don't want to leave farming, so they're ready to leave the country to go to the closest second best place. Ġifieri qed jgħiduli, and two people told me this in the past 2 months. No connection to each other, and it was like, you know, it's an eye-opener. It's an eye-opener. They're ready to, you know, it's big.
Yes, there's a lot. Manuela, your final thoughts?
My thoughts, the final thoughts are that I think it's really good that we're talking about this, and that even there are these things like the European Green Deal, etc. But now it's about putting them into practice and helping the people who want to put into practice actually do it. But if these things are moved by government entities, it will take longer, you know. So I really believe that the people first need to wake up and demand them. So there's a bit of pressure on both sides. But I'm faithful. I think these things can actually come into place, and Malta is perfect for an example of doing something a little bit more localized and retaining biodiversity and all this. So yes, I'm hopeful, basically. Yeah, that it could.
It's really good to hear someone who is hopeful.
I mean, otherwise we just jump ship. What do? We leave Malta. It's difficult to.
Have you watched the Biggest Little Farm?
I haven't.
No? Watch it. And Roberta, if you have good connections to the top in Malta and Europe,
particularly,
send them a link and make them all watch it, because this documentary is incredible. And it shows you how in 20 years, a couple who understood the environment, the environmentalists, all right, they invested money in a plot of land that was desertificated. So they told them, and within 15 to 20 years, because they worked in harmony with the environment, they literally created their own microclimate. They created rain in an area where it couldn't rain that deep. So watch it, because it is exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, what's it called again?
The Biggest Little Farm.
Okay, excellent.
It's incredible, and it tells you how every pest and creature and the rain and fungi has its job. You know what I mean? It's incredible. It's exactly what we're talking about.
So there is hope. It's been done, and we just need to all work together.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your passion in this area, and also for the work that you do on a daily basis. Thank you so much, and hope that many people will be listening in to hear what you have had to share with them, and hopefully take on some of your tips. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice day.
You. Bye.